So my name's Dave Packer. I'm the Program Manager for Meat Standards Australia. Thanks for coming along to MLA updates today. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of MSA Sheepmeat. So whilst we've had MSA Sheepmeat for a bit over a decade now, we've got a very new a tool and model which will capture significant value for the sheepmeat industry. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of the current status of sheepmeat today. And then we're joined by Dr. Peter McGilchrist from UNE. He'll talk to you a bit more about the model and some of the technologies that are used to capture the IMF data. And then we've got Laura Garland from the MSA team. So Laura's the Producer Engagement Officer. So importantly, she's going to tell you how you can go about taking the next steps in preparation for the new phase of MSA Sheepmeat. So as I said, we've had MSA, and we call it pathways, for over a decade. So it's basically an in or out system for sheepmeat. So we've got a couple of measures we take off the lamb. So one of those being a minimum fat of a fat score 2 or a GR fat depth of 6. But what really enabled improvement in sheepmeat eating quality for the industry was the introduction of electrical stimulation. So up here we've got pre-MSA and post-MSA. Along the bottom we've got shear force, which is a machine we use to measure the tenderness of sheepmeat. So pre-MSA we had some pretty tough samples getting around in the commercial industry, but with the introduction of electrical stimulation we really reduced that variation in eating quality. So it was a real step forward for Australian sheepmeat and helped us provide a more consistent product to our consumers. But we've still got eating quality variation across Australia. So just to explain this busy graph a little bit more, up the side we've got this thing called overall liking. So to help build both the sheep and the beef models, we use untrained consumers. And they actually eat lots and lots of samples of beef and sheep meat, and they're just everyday consumers such as yourselves. And one of the ratings they score the product is overall liking, and there's other measures such as tenderness and juiciness and flavour. But what you can see here is out of a score of 100, so this is basically a failed product, up to a really supreme product, there's significant variation in the quality of sheep meat. And this is coming from our MLA resource flock. So this is our MLA funded, I guess we've got 2 flocks, one in Armidale, one in Katanning, where we use industry size and get an industry benchmark of how we're performing genetically across the flock. So there's significant variation, and the other point is that hot carcass weight has very little correlation with eating quality, and that's one of the metrics that we're paid on currently. Not to say it's not important, it's a very important trait, but you can't use fat or hot carcass weight alone in predicting eating quality. What's even more frightening, again, sorry for the busy slide, but we've got a meat eating quality score, so that comes from the consumers up the side. And then we've got a bunch of red dots, so that's the 2009-2010 drop out of the MLA resource flock, and then we've got the grey dots for the 2017. So the line of best fit, and we've got intramuscular fat on the bottom, the line of best fit for that 09-10 drop is the top line, and the 2017 drop is the bottom line. So that indicates to us we're actually getting worse across the Australian flock for eating quality. So we're actually decreasing eating quality, and that's partly been driven by paying on price. So we've actually been selecting for heavier, higher yielding animals. It's actually driving our eating quality down. So that's a bit alarming, and I guess the right time to be introducing something such as the MSA sheepmeat model. So how will MSA work, and how will it actually capture value for the sheepmeat industry? So at the moment, if these are all loins, we're packing them all in the same box, and we're selling lamb as lamb or sheepmeat as sheepmeat. What we know from our commercial studies that we've been doing with commercial supply chains recently is there's actually significant variation in eating quality. So we're seeing product that is borderline failing to going to consumers, packed in the same box as product that is supreme product. So at 2 ends of the scale, because there's no way of determining eating quality. So we are launching it and I guess going to utilise the MSA model in the industry to help us segregate products and help brand owners build brands to provide consistent product to consumers and extract value by possibly creating a premium branding and demanding a more supreme product and a better price. and then having tiering across their branding strategy. So that's the aim of the MSA model, and that's what's really enabled the beef program to extract further value. So I'm going to pass it over to Pete, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the model and some of the technology that's really enabled the introduction of the sheep meat program.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for all joining us this afternoon. So the MSA sheep meat's very similar to the beef model. Essentially, we have different cook methods. So at this point in time, we've got grilling and roasting, and then it comes out with the different qualities. So fail, good, better, best, essentially. So what we know is that the way we cook mussels, has a big effect on the eating quality score. So if you want to test that theory, try and barbecue a lamb shank. Doesn't go so well. And so what we've found in research over the last few years is that lamb's actually pretty cool. They've got what I call 3 loins. So we found a couple of muscles in there that are actually very high in quality as well. So loin, of course, is one of those, but the rump and knuckle as a grill also eat very well also. So the knuckle, which is around in beef, is a pretty terrible cut in beef, to be frank. But in lambs, it's pretty impressive. And the rump actually scores at average IMF. The rump actually scores a little bit higher than the loin as well. So it's really cool that we've got these different cuts that we'll be able to extract more value out of simply because we know their relationship to the loin. And then roasting, we've measured a few of those: the knuckle, the leg, as a whole leg, the loin and the rack, and also the shoulder as well. So we've been working on, I'll talk in future research, but working on a few other cook methods as well. So how do we predict these things? It's a bit like the Bureau of Meteorology predicting the weather. We take carcass phenotypes and then put that into a model, and it spits out that this lamb, the loin of this lamb as a grill will be 60 points or whatever it is. So that's what we want. So what are the inputs in the lamb model is carcass weight. So Dave showed that there's not a heavy relationship between carcass weight and eating quality, but there is some relationship there. Also lean meat yield. So we can get that from a DEXA system, so dual X-ray absorptiometry. So there's, I think, about 7 of them in lamb plants around the country now. Or we can simply use GR tissue depth and carcass weight to predict lean meat yield as well. So there's a simpler model and a more complex model, and then intramuscular fat on an individual animal. So this was our challenge, essentially, is we knew we couldn't use human graders to measure marbling or intramuscular fat in lambs at line speed, because beef might go at 2 a minute. Lambs are going at up to 14 a minute, some plants these days. So there's no way a human can keep up with that and not get fatigued. So we needed some technologies, which I'll go into in the next slide, to measure intramuscular fat. We have to have some electrical stimulation to make sure they don't get cold shortened. So we can take a perfectly good animal, we can chill it too fast and treble its toughness just in that hour or two after processing. So we certainly don't want to do that. And we know as we age lamb, so you've all done it at home, you hang it for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, and the meat quality gets better. So that's going to be in the model also. So how do we measure intramuscular fat? We've got 2 devices at the moment, which are both here today, that are approved. So the meat eating quality probe, or the MEQ probe, they actually do that hot at chain speed, and that gives us a percentage of marbling in that loin, which is pretty cool. And it uses lasers and the reflectance of those lasers from the meat. So being a hot measure means you can also make decisions about how you're going to bone that carcass, what brand they're going to go into, what cutting specs you're going to have on that, so you can eke a lot more money out of that carcass than if you only get that answer when they're cold. This one is the Soma Optics, so out of Japan, so it's approved as well for a bit wider range, but it's a cold device, so the carcass and the meat needs to be cold before you measure it. So, probably more suited to smaller operations or segregation of the loins. And then a couple that are still in development is the optical coherence tomography probe. So that's out of the medical industry. So they use OCT to look at the margins when you're having a brain operation. Hopefully you don't have too many in life. But when they look for the margins between the grey matter and a blood vessel, because having a brain operation and nicking a blood vessel is not very good for your health. And so he said to them, well, if you can determine the margin between those two tissues in the brain, surely you can do that for us in lamb and in beef. And so, yeah, it's got 4 probes on it. It goes in and basically looks at the fat as it comes out. And the last one is one that's been developed in New Zealand, so nuclear magnetic resonance, but mostly with help by Australia. And it's a robotic system. So there's a magnet here. The carcass comes along and this thing pushes the carcass against the magnet. And the beauty of that one is there's no labour involved in it. So you get a measurement with no people attached to that piece of technology. So these 2 are still in development phase. Those 2 are approved already for industry, which is pretty cool. So in time, just like the beef system, we'll generate an MSA index, which again will be a single number to indicate the overall quality of the carcass. It'll be a weighted average of the eating quality scores from all the cuts across that carcass, and it's an awesome benchmarking tool. So if you buy a new ram, or if you're an abattoir and you're purchasing cattle from sheep from multiple vendors, then you can look at the quality of someone's sheep compared to someone else's lambs. So yeah, it's an awesome benchmarking tool wherever you sit across the value chain. So what I do for MLA is a lot of the research. So we've been doing a lot on expanding the cooking methods that are available. So we have done a lot of slow cooking. We've also done a lot of stir frying as well. So the top side, the only way to eat lamb top side is essentially as a stir fry. And then some Texas barbecue, so low and slow on the lamb shoulders and knuckles and things like that. So another fun cooking method. We're collecting data from the MLA resource flock, and the beauty of having these animals that are genotyped by Neogen is that we can relate the eating quality scores back to those genomics. So, and AGBU are developing a ASBV for eating quality. So rather than looking at shear force and marbling as individual traits, we will have an ASBV for eating quality in the coming years as well. The other opportunity we've got is around hoggets. So we've eaten a few hoggets, but they represent a proportion or population that we can also trade on sheep meat. So we've done a bit of work on them. 4-tooth and 6-tooth animals are also low-hanging fruit because they all get called mutton, whereas in reality they're going to be way better than an 8-tooth animal, or the holy grail is to have a technology to measure collagen content in the meat so we don't have to look at teeth at all. And also we're doing work on the sale yard pathway. So lambs that come into the sale yard and then go into, how does that affect the stress associated with that extra loading and unloading and the excitement of the auction? How does that affect their eating quality? So what does the future hold? The goal is that all sheep will be eligible to be MSA graded. So any age, any breed, through any pathway. And also the holy grail is that we trade sheep meat on eating quality, not on dentition. That's one we really want to crack. Laura.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so now that we've heard how the program works, what we're trying to achieve, what research we've been doing for the last little while, and some things that we're really, really close to implementing commercially, what are some of the things that can be the next step for a producer? So if we think about sheep, one of the most powerful tools that we have available to us are in genetics. So genetics has a huge impact on eating quality. So we need to make sure we feed them, but having that genetic potential in the animals as well. And so we can use things like Australian sheep breeding values, so ASBVs, to determine eating quality in progeny, so selecting sires with high IMF EBVs, but also having those in combination with yield as well. So one of the things that sheep genetics have developed in the last couple years is around these eating quality indexes. So having an index that you can select on and having a balanced selection of yield, so improving yield, but also either improving eating quality or maintaining it. And I'll show you a slide just in a second around those two traits. But we have all of this information in really palatable, bite-sized resources on our Accelerate or the MLA Genetics Hub. So you can go in there, select your animal type. So we also have it for prime lambs and merino, tropical, temperate cattle, understanding ASBVs and EBVs, selecting sires, and having all of these resources that take genetic information and making it really understandable for everyday producers and people. The other thing that I would recommend is, if you haven't headed outside already, the genetics guys are out in the wind with the edibles, but go out and pay them a visit and have a bit of a chat with them also. So if we think about the different traits that have an impact on eating quality, so we've got IMF, so intramuscular fat, and lean meat yield. Now, these two traits, generally, when you select for one, the other one is a bit of an antagonist. So this is some data from a producer in southwest Victoria, and what we've been able to see, and this is based on IMF EBVs, is basically by selecting for lean meat yield over time has had an impact on intramuscular fat. So as yield's gone up, fat's come down. Now, with the introduction of ASBVs and having that balanced selection, what you can actually do is kind of bend that curve. What Pete was saying a little bit earlier in the other session is that this is around, 2010, 12, 14. This is where ASBVs became really available for sheep producers as well. And so what you can see is that basically by selecting on, you can select yield and IMF in tangent, so moving that back around as well. The other thing that we want to have available for sheep producers quite soon is being able to see your carcass data similarly as the beef system. And so at the moment with beef, we have all this fantastic grading data that we can then benchmark, so you can look at your animals versus other animals from like systems, compare on a national, state or regional basis. And so we have our index. What we're seeing down here is your results versus the rest of Queensland. You can see your averages, the range of information, and look at different traits. So we're going to have a very similar setup available for sheep producers as well. And the last thing that we really recommend is finding out more information through our adoption services and adoption programs. So it's fantastic to come along to days like this. So we would term these things workshops and field days, like as awareness activities. And then we have short-term training programs that are available. So for the sheep side, Bred Well, Fed Well is one of our key flagship programs around improving eating quality, improving breeding values on farm, and looking into that sort of feed-based management as well, and the Edge Network. And then taking the next step into these long-term practice change programs. So again, our core flagship around producer demonstration site and profitable grazing systems courses. So you've got groups of producers coming together, exploring different content, different topics, trying things out on their farm, having peers that they can relate to and speak with, and sharing of that information. So being able to see that practice in place over a long period of time. So if you are interested in that, head over and have a chat with Sally Lago. She's in the services hub, and I will hand you back to Dave.
Righto, guys. Well, thank you very much. Come down and have a chat to us at the front. We've got the Simon here. As I said, some loin samples with varying ranges in IMF. Obviously, one of the important drivers of eating quality. And enjoy the rest of the day. And thanks for your attention. Cheers.